Welcome to our press conference today. Thanks very much for your interest. We are a group of people who represent a vast coalition of Asian American advocacy groups and organizations across the country. Obviously, the topic at hand is not one that we would like to be talking about, but it is one that is important and one that we really do hope to make some progress on. We are here, as you all know, because there's been quite a bit of violence, quite a bit of racism, quite a bit of harassment against Asian Americans all across the country. These are issues that concern a great deal of us. These are also issues that many of us have been aware of for a long, long time. And about a week ago, Linda Yang and I had a phone conversation. Linda is the director of the Washington Asians for Equality, and I was heartened to hear from Linda that she had an interest in taking concrete action to address the issues that we all see in the news, rather than just talking about it. And then a couple of days later, I had a conversation with Marc Ang from Asian Industry B2B in Southern California. Marc's organization is a pro-business networking group. And soon after that, the three of us put our heads together and we reached out to our friends across the country, as well as people we don't know, but we reached out to folks in different Asian American communities all across the country, because we believe that there are lots of people who have the same concerns that we do, and lots of people who share our interest in finding concrete solutions. So about a week later, we are very proud of the coalition that we've put together. There are parent groups, there are educational advocacy groups, there are business organizations, there are different individuals and organizations all across the country who are participating in our effort. And we're also proud of the fact that it is a nonpartisan group, because we believe that the issues we're trying to address are nonpartisan issues, or at least they should not be political issues, even though they have, however, been politicized in recent months. So we will start with some remarks from Linda and Marc. We will go to Linda first. As I said earlier, Linda is the director of Washington Asians for Equality. Linda, please go ahead.
Can't hear me? Can't hear me? Yeah, okay. So, racism against Asian Americans is nothing new. It is unfortunate that it has taken so many recent tragic incidents and death for Americans to wake up to the racism Asian Americans have been facing for so many years. The recent interest in anti-Asian hate crime coverage and the current public debate serves as an opportunity to take a hard look at this country's long history of anti-Asian sentiment. We condemn anti-Asian hate crimes and racism across the country, and we call on action, not empty rhetoric, to end anti-Asian racism. Anti-Asian racism comes in many shapes and forms. While people are appalled by the brutal attacks on Asians, they should be equally outraged that Asian students are being deprived of fair chance of college admission due to their race. Politicians are coming to rallies, speaking on TVs to show their support to the Asian American community, yet talks are cheap. Therefore, we formed the National Coalition and asking for real actions. Education changes lives. Many of us were very disappointed when the Department of Justice dropped their Yale lawsuit only 2 weeks after President Biden took office. Our first ask of real action is for President Biden to reinstate the Department of Justice's Yale lawsuit. We're not asking anyone to take a side on this case. Judge will issue the final ruling. We're asking a chance of a discovery, a chance of a fair trial. The Department of Justice's 2-year Yale investigation found that Asian Americans have only 1/8 of the likelihood of admission as African American applicants with comparable academic credentials. Asian students who were rejected by Yale need a closure. Let me read one message that was posted on Chinese social media. This year, the top students in our high school applying for computer science, no one got in. UC Berkeley, UCLA, none was accepted. The best was waitlisted. The only one of my son's friends who was accepted to Berkeley applied for mechanical engineering. My friend was in Palo Alto and said they were in the same boat. College admission is stressful, and the added stress to Asian students is that knowing their race would play against them. If this is not racism, then what is? Does this country have the courage to admit and address anti-Asian racism in higher education? To truly combat anti-Asian racism, we need to look at the root causes and have difficult conversations. As a nation's leader, we hope that President Biden has the courage to officially acknowledge that anti-Asian racism has existed before the COVID-19 pandemic, and this country has failed to adequately address long-standing violence and racism against Asians. Any anti-Asian hate crime is a hate crime. Any anti-Asian racism is racism. It is important that President Biden make a clear public stand that any perpetrators of a violent attack against Asian American will be publicly condemned and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, regardless of the perpetrator's race. The Asian American community has always embraced law and order. Many victims of those violent attacks are women and elderly, the most vulnerable members of our community. Last month, Maryland Governor Hogan announced enhanced visibility patrols to protect Asian business and communities. We praise Governor Hogan's swift action in protecting the Asian American community. To protect all Asian American community across the country, we need leadership in Washington to take actions. We call on Vice President Kamala Harris to be appointed at the head of the national law and order effort to strengthen police protection for Asian Americans in their communities. We need to be proactive. We need not to only respond to attacks, but also prevent attacks from happening. Lastly, I want to use this opportunity to call out the racism exists right here in Washington State. Just yesterday, despite our repeatedly asked to table SB 5228, a bill that would create racial quota against Asian students in medical school admissions in Washington, Democrat-controlled Washington legislature passed that bill by party line vote. And last month, Democrat leadership in the Senate set on a bill with bipartisan support and let it die at the cutoff. If passed, SB 5264 would encourage public schools to commemorate Chinese Americans' history. Politicians talking about fighting against anti-Asian racism with words. We're demanding actions. Actions speak louder than words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. And I want to say welcome to those of our friends from the media as well as from elsewhere who have joined us in the last few minutes. Again, our press conference today highlights not only anti-Asian racism and violence that's been going on, but it also highlights the vast coalition that we've been able to put together in the past week. We're very proud of this nonpartisan coalition. Our thanks go especially to Marc and Linda for having spearheaded this effort and gathered so many different groups and individuals from across the country together to pursue this worthwhile cause. So now we are going to ask for some brief remarks from Marc Ang, who is the president of Asian Industry B2B.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ying. Thank you, Linda, for your wonderful statement as well. It's so great to work with you guys. And within just a week, cobbled together basically hundreds of organizations around the country in major geographic areas like Washington, California, Maryland, and we also have representatives from Houston and I believe New York and different parts of the country. So thank you so much for seeing that there is a common thread and a desire for action. I also want to thank the media. Thank you for all you guys that are here searching for the truth and wanting to cover the truth. It is because of the media and this attention and the activism from a lot of people from the left and the right to create this moment where for the first time Asian Americans are getting the time of the day in the spotlight. it's very important because sadly it has to be, from these dire circumstances, but from tragedy always comes wonderful things that can happen to further our community's goals and our community standing. So I want to chat a little bit about that today. The first thing I want to hit, though, is the overall national coverage of the attacks on Asians. I think that while well-intentioned to have to shine the light on certain incidents such as Atlanta, there was a quick knee-jerk reaction to further certain narratives and at the expense of others. And with Atlanta, I think there was some false email that originally circulated and created a false narrative of a white supremacy issue that certainly did not materialize. It was found out even by Snopes, a fact-checking website, that that was indeed a fabricated and false email. And that Atlanta, in the next few days, because the shooter, who had murdered 6 Asian American women, as well as 2 other non-Asian American women, revealed his motivations and was revealed to be more of an issue of a sex crime rather than a racially motivated crime. And that was obvious because he was a patron of these massage parlors. And instead of having a national discussion about certain issues that do affect the community at large, especially regarding sex crimes like this, that did not get the airplay because a false narrative was instead put out there. So I really encourage the media to start looking at different angles of different of these events that have happened, and not to jump to conclusions, and also to highlight some really empowering moments. As sad as the attack on Miss Xiao was in Northern California, she ultimately prevailed against her attacker, bruises and all. She was able to raise $1 million with her GoFundMe and dedicate it back to the cause. So I think there should be a bias towards positivity as well. So I really hope that the media that covers this today presents a different angle, because I know there's been a lot of Asian rallies and Stop Asian Hate. I love that hashtag. But at the end of the day, there is a nuance to what we're talking about today. And I want to expound on that nuance with some of the local issues. Being a Southern California leader, leading Asian Industry B2B, and dealing with so many people in the community, some of which we have here, such as my good friend Ted Bowie, who is the vice president of the Fountain Valley Rotary Club, different business organizations, different community groups. There is a different reality we see when we deal with people than what gets reported in the media. For example, there's really not much white supremacist attacks on Asians. And I really want to go on record about that. There is violence. There's violence coming from different races as well, and that does not get covered, and that almost gets suppressed, such as what happened with 35-year-old E. Lee in Wisconsin, who was out for an evening jog and was brutally gang raped, murdered, and left to die. And that case, as brutal and as sensational as it was, got very little airplay. And for the memory of this young, really sad, the Hmong and the Cambodians, immigrants there are not rich people. And it's very sad that, a lot of it I know is socioeconomically motivated, but, a lot of Asians are not rich. And that's important to remember that. Here locally, there's been a spike of crimes in Los Angeles. For the first quarter in Q1, barely even to the middle of March, we already surpassed all the shootings that we've had in the entire 2020. What could cause that difference? That suddenly, dramatically this year, we have all of this, crime that is coming from our new district attorney, who is not prosecuting, to the point that our sheriff, Alex Villanueva, has come out to recall George Gascon, our current DA, who is not prosecuting some of these very brutal crimes, and crimes have spiked as a result. So we really need to look at this. And this goes to point number 3 of our press release that Linda had just mentioned, and that you guys have probably received a copy of the press release. If you have not, contact me and I'll send it to you. that press release talks about a solution. Obviously, we would like actions, concrete actions, not lip service. While the Biden administration and the Democrats have done, a lot of, support, and we appreciate Joe Biden flying out to Georgia to be in solidarity with the victims. We need to have concrete action. And Kamala Harris, the VP, and also a Californian, is a natural choice due to her Asian heritage. But even if it is not Kamala, we are fine with that as well. We would like concrete action to empower our law enforcement. As Linda had mentioned, we are very supportive of our law enforcement, and we work very well with our law enforcement. And our Asian community is even more prone to not report crimes and move on and deal with it after being victims. We really need to foster better partnerships with our law enforcement, and we need a leader to do that. And I would like to, really stress that point, that we need some concrete solutions. We need to encourage community organizations to come in with self-defense. A lot of our Asian attacks have been towards the elderly, and the elderly are defenseless. They're going to the market, they're buying their groceries, and they're getting attacked. So what are concrete ways that law enforcement can support, but ultimately also teach our Asian community how to defend themselves? These are the topics that are going to be on our April 17th rally. So for those of you, I know a lot of press is from Southern California, and we will be holding this at the Irvine City Hall next Saturday, April 17th, at 10 a.m. to 12 noon. So it'll be a short presentation, but we're going to have a lot of local community leaders and key people to come out and speak against, the Asian hate, but also to provide concrete solutions. So thank you so much for listening to my thoughts, and I appreciate you, Ying, Linda, and everyone else that's on this call.
Well, Mark, thanks very much for your remarks. A few people have joined us in the last few minutes. So again, welcome to those who are just joining us. And for those of you who haven't seen our press release, let me just reiterate the 3 concrete specific steps that our coalition is asking the Biden administration to take. Number 1 is to reinstate the Justice Department's lawsuit against Yale University for engaging in practices that of racial preferences and other racist policies that reduce the number of Asian American students in undergraduate admissions. And we also ask the administration to denounce racial preferences in general. Our second request is for the administration to condemn, prosecute, and properly identify all attackers of Asian Americans. So this means not just holding them, it means 2 things. 1, it means being honest about who the attackers are, regardless of their race, and even if it's politically inconvenienced. Number 2 is holding them accountable to the fullest extent of the law. Number 3, and that goes to what Mark was just emphasizing in his remarks. Number 3 is empowering law enforcement, strengthening police protection of Asian Americans, particularly Asian Americans who live in urban areas, and particularly Asian Americans who are vulnerable, like our elderly. We've seen far too many videos in recent months of elderly Asian Americans being shoved, being attacked, and some of them being killed. Sometimes these are crimes that are committed with a profit motive. For instance, there is a Mr. Pak Ho, who was 75 and who died in Oakland's Lake Merritt area after he was robbed. He was beaten. And during the attack, while he was being robbed, he died from that attack. But then there are others who were attacked, like the Thai gentleman in San Francisco in January, and there was no profit motive. It was just a teenager doing a running tackle, and and this elderly Thai gentleman in his 80s subsequently died from that attack. And so we're you know, there are many people in our coalition. There are lots of people who are on both sides of the political spectrum, but these are the broad areas that we've come to an agreement on and that we are asking our policymakers to take concrete action on as well. Now, so at this point, we'd like to highlight some of the folks who are in our coalition. So we are going to ask Zhenya Li, who is from the state of Maryland, to give her thoughts. Zhenya is with an organization called Maryland Chinese American Network. She's an activist on the local level, and we are thrilled to not only have the support of her organization, but also to have her here today to chat with us a little bit and give her thoughts. Zhenya, please.
Thank you, Ying. You guys can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ying, for the introduction. Again, my name is Zhenya Li. I'm representing the Maryland Chinese American Network, MDCAN. You all heard from Linda about Governor Hogan, who issued the protection for Asian community, and you're going to also hear a statement from Mrs. Hogan, who's our First Lady, talking about her perspective in this whole situation. So as proud Marylanders, we joined this national coalition of Asian American advocacy groups effort to urge our local and federal government to take real steps in addressing the anti-Asian crimes, actually crimes against any racial groups. So we want our elected officials to work on closing the loopholes in laws and policies that resulted in these decriminalizing assaults against the vulnerable population, our seniors, and releasing criminals back to the street. We want to strengthen our police protection for the community. Equally important is that our Asian Americans are an integral part of the American history and culture. As Linda already mentioned, we are one nation, one color. Asian Americans are not just the model minority who work hard and take care of ourselves and our families. We play a significant role in building our country. So we want to recognize the Asian Americans' great contributions to our country. We ask our local public school systems to enrich the Asian American history in the local US history curriculum to recognize our contributions. We also denounce the racial preference and the bias terms such as Asian overrepresented, which is being used to reduce the number of Asian American students, either in college admission or in the gifted programs within the public school system. As Linda mentioned, we asked the Department of Justice to reinstate the lawsuit against Yale University regarding the discrimination against Asian American applicants. As many of you probably know, within Maryland, Montgomery County Public Schools, in 2 years ago, they adopted a universal selection process to intentionally exclude Asian American students from its magnet middle school programs. So the Department of Education Office for Civil Rights started an investigation on MCPS of discrimination on the basis of racial and national origin in the Magnan's program admission in March 2019. So we would like to see that investigation go to completion. All students should be admitted based on merit with assistance given to the economic need. So that's all I want to say today. Thank you for the opportunity. Back to you, Ying.
Hey, Zhenya, well, thank you very much. Really appreciate your remarks. As Zhenya mentioned, we received a letter of support from Maryland's First Lady, Hogan. And it's a letter we were very grateful to have. Some of you may have seen her op-ed on CNN over the weekend. She is Korean American, and she is also the first Korean American First Lady of a US state. And she's certainly expressed a great deal of anguish about what is going on in terms of the violence, in terms of the racism. I have no doubt that she's also keen to look for solutions. We thought it would be great to have a young lady who lives in Maryland to read Mrs. Hogan's letter to us. So we are very pleased to have Tia, who lives in Maryland, to do that for us. I believe Tia is in high school and she's in the 11th grade. And we're thrilled to have her. And so we'll hand it over to her to read Mrs. Hogan's letter to us.
Hi, thank you so much. Dear friends, I want to extend my gratitude to all of you for establishing this influential and powerful national coalition of Asian American advocacy groups to defeat hate crimes and discrimination against our community. As the first Korean American First Lady in any state and the first Asian American First Lady of Maryland, I am proud to support your important efforts and pleased to learn that organizations have joined the coalition. As a grandmother of 4 and the mother of 3 daughters, my heart aches for what has happened to my fellow Asian Americans, and I am concerned about the future of our children and grandchildren. Now is the time to speak out. This is our moment. Otherwise, this deep-rooted discrimination will never end. Actions of hate, discrimination, and bigotry should have no home anywhere. I appreciate your courageousness and am proud to see your organization coming together to stand against injustice and violence. This is yet another example of what it means to be American and to bring Asians and other communities together to build solidarity. Please remember that my heart and prayers will always be with you and with all the victims and their families. We will continue to raise our voices, protect each other, and demonstrate the strength and resilience of our community. Thank you, Ying Ma Hogan, First Lady of Maryland.
Well, our heartfelt thanks to Mrs. Hogan, and thank you, Tia, so very much for reading that. I think this is a moment when, once again, this is a nonpartisan issue. We've gathered a vast coalition, a very diverse coalition of nonpartisan organizations. We're grateful to have such kind and encouraging words from Maryland's First Lady. I believe, Mark, you have some additional comments.
Yeah, thanks, Ying. I thought about this after, a few times some of our panelists have spoken about racial preferences in schools. And I just want to attack that head on because I think some groups and media on the left may say, why are you tying this in with the racial violence that's going on and that they're two separate issues? I think the moment that we start talking about that almost excuses the violence. And I think a lot of the violence is rooted from the divisions that when you say, hey, let's take merit out of the equation and let's judge people by the color of their skin, that's when you start seeing the increased violence. And I'm so glad that California rejected this. 57-43, no on Proposition 16, which a lot of us did work on this campaign. It's amazing to see that we are now having a more nuanced discussion about what it means to be Asian American because of this. And it's so important to not excuse systemic racism like racial preferences in college admissions or hiring and, marking Asian Americans as less likable in certain college admission metrics to suddenly to excuse racism, which then gets escalated to violence. So honestly, I really wanted to just make that tie in concrete and say, yes, it's all related and we must fight and denounce all forms of racism. Thank you, Ian.
Okay, well, thank you, Mark. That concludes the formal presentation of our remarks. Before we go to Q&A, I do want to emphasize a few things. Our coalition is quite broad and it's not monolithic. So obviously there are lots of people in our coalition who would have different opinions about these very controversial issues. But again, we agree on the need, the urgent need to take some concrete action on what we're seeing in the news in terms of violence and racism against Asian Americans. And I think one of the solutions we've proposed, or one of the concrete requests that we've proposed, specifically the DOJ reinstatement of the lawsuit against Yale. I think for many of us, that's an issue that we've either felt strongly about over the years, or an issue that we've worked on over the years. And we see that as a form of racism that is insidious, and that is unacceptable, and that often does not get enough attention in American society. And that whatever the motivations of the attackers of the elderly, or whatever the motivations of the attackers of law-abiding Asian American citizens on New York subways, or just riding in their cars in Philadelphia, whatever it is, I think that for many of us, we believe that if in fact this country is serious about rooting out racism against Asian Americans, and if in fact the Biden administration is serious about combating racism against Asian Americans, then the first concrete action, or one of the first concrete actions that it can take, is to get rid of these very racist racial preferences in higher education, and increasingly in secondary education. So with that, we have on the line a young man who is a member of Marc's organization, Asian Industry B2B. And what we like to do at our events is, I think, because so much of what we're fighting for really is for all Americans, but especially for the next generation, we're always thrilled to have participation from younger people in our events. And so we're gonna allow a young member of Marc's organization to ask the first question before we open it to the floor to reporters, as well as friends from elsewhere in the country. So we've got Peter Chang here. Peter, please go ahead and ask the first question. So Peter, you are still, oh, all right, go ahead.
Good morning. How are you doing? Yeah, sorry, I'm having a little bit of issues with the Zoom, but thank you guys so much for hosting such a great event. I just have a question for you, that why is so much of the hate targeted towards Asian Americans, and so much of the crimes are targeted towards Asian Americans? Because as a high school student here in the city of Eastville in California, we run a organization called the Chinese American Volunteers Association, and we do a lot of the community service and volunteering, and we see ourselves as very active in the community, and doing our part to help American society grow together. And I just don't understand that why is so much of the racial hate, racial violence, and so much of the discrimination by the system, such as Prop 16 in California, are targeted towards Asian Americans, and what we can do to eliminate this target on our backs. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Peter. Marc or Linda, would you guys like to take that question?
Yeah, sure. Peter, I feel for you, because I actually grew up at a time where before 1996, when there was before Prop 209 got instituted, where when I was in high school, there was a lot of discussion about how as an Asian person, we're going to get dinged when we apply for college or for jobs because of quotas. And I remember growing up at that time feeling the exact emotions I felt were, is it bad to be Asian? Are we less than? We're not like everyone else. And that feeling of being different is something that I think profoundly was damaging to to my psyche as an Asian person growing up in America. And I'm so sad that right now you're kind of experiencing the same thing. Thanks goodness we fought back Prop 16, but even having that discussion in itself was, I saw the emotions. I saw young girls, young boys from high school that spoke at our events, and they were crying. I mean, tears were coming down their eyes because they felt like, are we less than? And that's a terrible thing. And those are my thoughts. Linda, I'd love to hear yours.
Actually,
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Linda, if I may interrupt, before you answer, let me just give a heads up to our friends in the audience. So for those of you who wish to ask a question, given that this is a webinar, could you please use the Q&A function in this Zoom conference and just type in your question. Please also identify yourself. And then, what we're going to do is we're going to give preference to our friends in the media, especially since this is a press conference after all. But for those of you who are not with the press, and if you have a question, we encourage you to ask as well. You could also raise your hand if you'd like. We're right now, we've still got plenty of time, so we hope to be able to get to everybody's questions before the end of this press conference, but we will be giving preference to those who are in the media. So Linda, my apologies, please go ahead.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, I think it's a great question. We actually have been, in our head has been asking that question many, many times. I think it's come to, I think there's two things. The word perpetual foreigner, I think it's not something new to Asians. And I think this is one of the key reason Asians are not integrated into the society, regardless how hard we try. If you watch, after the recent event, there's lots of people come out and they speak about their experience. Perpetual foreigner is a very consistent theme. And this is something this country need to take a hard look at and figure a way to address it. To some degree, we feel like the current focus on the hate is actually distract the public from having a very serious conversation about why they're happening. Ying and I, we actually had a conversation about, the Asian history in our public systems. I think the lady from the Maryland actually mentioned, the Asian history, I'm talking contributions, have not been very well respected in American education system. Our contribution to this country, since the 19th century, even further, was not well known. We have organized a student right essay about Chinese American history, and story after story, people are talking about when they share their story with their classmates. Nobody know about those stories. When you don't know we are part of the society, we help build this country, you lack the appreciation to this, this community. And when you look at what you look at different, you look like foreigner. You immediately think, wow, you're not one of us. Then I want to come down to the hardships the Asians being experienced. Also, quite often they are not being talked about. I don't want to emphasize that because I don't want to fall the prey of the identity politics. But I know through our conversation with the legislature in Washington, I know the lack of knowledge of Asians' contribution, the lack of respect to the Asians' contribution, the also lack of the knowledge of the Asians' sufferings. Those combinations make them to pass laws that could punish, could hurt Asians. They feel it's okay. Mm-hmm. They look at us, well, you live in a middle class neighborhood, you come talk to me, you suffered, you suffered the racism. No, that's not. That's why actually I forward them the article, the CNN article about First Lady Ying Ma Hogan. I said, look at her story. That's a similar story to many of us. and you call us to be privileged to pass laws
Mhm.
that hurt us. It's not acceptable. You talk about anti-Asian racism, and you are practicing anti-Asian racism right in those laws. And if we don't address that, if as a nation to call out that, look at this, this is a community contribute to the society, and there's those reasons right in those legislative heart, those things would continue. History would repeat itself. That's why we call action, not empty talks. I mean, you have to address this has been going on for very, very, very long. It's not the past, since COVID-19. It's not the past 4 years. It has been going on for decades and decades. I could say probably every single one of us can recall at least one incident we've been, we facing those, racist behaves. That's not the past 1 year, past 4 years. Just never, the society never give us a chance to talk about that. And this is an opportunity for to the society to actually talk about that. And I really don't want all the anti-hate thing to basically distract us from the opportunity to have a real conversation.
Linda, thanks for underscoring that point. I really just want to just add on that, yes, it's finally time that we're talking about it, but we have so much to talk about, from the racial preferences, from everything. I mean, there's so much to talk about. So thank you so much for underscoring that. Ying, back to you.
Okay, we have a question from Caitlin McFall, who is with Fox News. So let's see here. We have actually, Caitlin, if you'd like, feel free to ask your question. You don't need to show your face if you don't want to, but please feel free to ask your question.
Sure. Thanks so much. So in regards to your calls to reinstate the DOJ lawsuit against Yale, have you been able to directly address this with anyone in Congress or the White House? And if so, what has been the response to that?
Linda, you want to go ahead and take this one?
We have, I mean, everything just happened. I mean, the DOJ case just started, it just came the case, in February, and then we got hit with all the recent, incidents. So I personally have not reached out to anyone in Congress. I think that Ying and I, we were talk about use this correlation as the starting point to actually reach out to talk to Congress. Ying, do you have any update on that?
So we've passed along our statement and our list of requests for specific action in a kind of a public way to the Biden administration, but obviously this will require further follow-up. There are offices on Capitol Hill who have received our statement / press release as well. Thus far, we have not received a response. But as Linda says, I think because there is so much going on right now, and there are a lot of incidents of actual crime happening, that has just swallowed up a lot of the attention. We would certainly like to, and I think there are also organizations in our coalition who focus more exclusively on education than others do, and it's possible that they have separately relayed their concerns about the DOJ lawsuit to the Biden White House. But we do hope to follow up in the days and weeks to come, and we'd be glad to keep everybody posted.
And also, I wanted to add on this. I'm working with Representative Chris Smith from New Jersey on some other matters relating to immigration of healthcare workers. And we're also going to, I also did mention this to him, and there's some interest. So we've started the preliminary conversations, but as a coalition, we had to, sidetrack and look at, all the attacks that have happened and focus on that. So, I'm so excited to work with you, Ying and Linda, on these projects going forward.
Well, thank you. So our next question comes from Steve Angeles with ABS CBN, which is the Filipino channel. Steve, if you'd like to unmute yourself, please go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thanks. I know Mark mentioned police issues during his opening statement. So I wanted to know and see what your take was on. I know last year they started doing all these different moves for police reform. Some communities kind of lessened patrols, and even overall because of the pandemic and no one was out and about, naturally the police weren't as active. Do you see this possibly leading to more of these anti-Asian incidents, just knowing that there might not be as much police watching the streets as usual? And I mean, do you think something should be done? Last year there was also seemed to be a distrust between police and certain communities as well, that led to the calls for reform.
Yeah, Steve, thanks for that question. Great one, especially as it pertains to the city we both share, residence with in LA and Southern California in general. And that's the reason I had mentioned that George Gascon, the current DA, had gotten elected, was part of that, by a slim margin. And, his predecessor, Jackie Lacey, was very much a tough on crime, and that was her stance. And in the end, she lost by 7 points, 53-46. Now, that has caused a major change, a seismic shift in how LA County processes crime. And it actually has led to spikes and increases when, during Lacey's term, things had started declining, and it was becoming safer. So, yeah, absolutely. And, the different communities, there's a balance as always, right? There's always, we do have to address the certain aspects of, things that we saw in the George Floyd instance, for example, that led to, the Black Lives Matter movement and all of these things that were happened in 2020. But yeah, the bottom line is Asians are getting, the short end of the stick on this. It is terrible because, I myself was a victim of crime in 2016. I've mentioned this a lot. That was really when the spike of crime started increasing, when the threshold for a misdemeanor versus a felony was higher. So it was so a lot of crime started hitting Asian cities where they stole old used vehicles, actually, because it was under a certain $1,000 amount. And, my truck got stolen. And when I reported to the police, they said, it'll probably resurface in the next few days. Lo and behold, 12 days later, it was found in the city of Compton with a parking ticket. So to add insult to the injury. But when I reported this and talked to the police as well as the Cerritos city council people that lived in the city, they said this was a common thing that happens frequently. And I said, oh my goodness, I thought this was like a one-off. It actually is a common thing. And so this Asian crime on Asians, especially property crime, and in like cities like Arcadia, where Chinese homes are targeted because a lot of people know that the elderly Chinese hide their money under mattresses. I mean, all of this has been going on for many years, even before, the last administration got into office. So, all of this stuff, I really hope people start talking about it because it does affect us very locally, especially in Southern California. It is targeted crime. It is race-based. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we are going to move on to our next question, and it comes from Jennifer O'Connell from Red State. Jennifer, so I've now promoted you to a panelist. Please feel free to ask your question.
Thank you, Ying. Are there links to some of these crimes? I know Mark mentioned one about the violent rape of a Hmong resident, and a lot of these things that aren't promoted to the major papers tend to show up in the smaller publications, obviously in the local publications, and a lot of them are not in the English language. So is there any way someone could supply us with links of some of these other crimes that haven't been highlighted and probably should have? And also, what can the media do to take off that tunnel vision lens of, you know, oh, it's a white supremacy crime, as opposed to this is just this is a crime and it needs to be reported and here's why?
Mark, you want to answer first, or you want me to answer first?
No, go ahead, Linda.
Oh, okay.
I'll tackle that later.
Okay, so for most of the, if you follow like Asian Dawn, Nick Shark on Twitter, they are normally pretty quick on posting those attacks. And as you said, many of those are not picked up by major news outlet. But they do circle really quickly in the Asian community, and people are very, very upset. I said really very upset. Why is why media is not covering them if they don't fit into certain narratives? We feel like we've been used, really. And and what's so next? I think the in terms of what the media can do is really just to report, like I said, any crime is crime, any hate crime is a hate crime. To just to start to report them, not just focus on certain narratives. If it doesn't, well, sometimes we joke when we saw those attacks, those videos, we will say we're news reported. Sure enough, news would not report it. Maybe you get a couple seconds on local news and that's it. So there's this skeptical about are we gonna get justice? Are we really gonna get justice? Or like we're on a fit. I saw some article, I think it was New York Times, some just came up this today, was talking about now they're saying so there's those crimes committed by the certain community. They're talking about there's a mental illness things. The mental illness can come into play again. So I was like, great. Are we going to use mental illness as a way to let those crimes get away from that? I know mental illness is a very sensitive topic. I don't want to dive into that, but for our community, the ask is very simple. If this grandma was attacked, if this woman was attacked, we want justice. We don't want excuse for the attackers. We want justice for the victims. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and to add on that, thank you so much, Linda, for mentioning Asian Dawn. Asian Dawn really on a minute-by-minute basis. So Jennifer, I encourage you to follow them on Instagram or Facebook, where they really post all of these like up-to-date events. I mean, it's crazy how many attacks are going on that do not get reported by media. But one thing to answer your second part of your question about what can the media do, I think there should be consistent media standards on reporting, when crimes happen. I noticed the omission of race at times when they talk about certain cases and the inclusion of race in others, or showing a photo of the perpetrator at times and then at other times not. So I think the lack of consistency is what contributes. It's almost a sin of omission at times when the media wants to report certain aspects of the perpetrator's background and other times not. So I think that would go a long way into ensuring that there is no tunnel vision in just pushing a certain narrative, which ends up being the end result. It may not be the intent, but it ends up being the result. So I hope that answers your question too.
Okay, thank you, Linda and Mark. I'd also like to thank our friends who are from local media who are with us on this press conference today. I myself grew up in inner city Oakland, and I grew up watching KTSF, and they are with us here today, and they've done a lot of great reporting over the years, including about a lot of the incidents that don't get attention from the mainstream media, and because it is not in the English language, a lot of times it's harder for people to access. But I have noticed that over time, especially given the use of YouTube videos these days. Over time, I think the most egregious attacks do surface on the internet, even if it's not in a CNN article or even if it's not in a Washington Post article, that you can find a lot of these videos of horrible attacks happening. And I would echo what Linda and Mark said about Asian Dawn, but I do think that sometimes, you know, we are all looking for credible sources of information, and a lot of times we continue to rely on the local media to report local incidents and crime. So often it remains a local issue, and that's why we are so keen on asking for better local police protection, or finding ways to do that, and instead of just saying, you know, oh, the attacker had a mental illness problem and hence we should do XYZ, but ultimately to the victim, you know, if somebody's grandfather was killed because an attacker had a mental illness, who may or may not have been racist, who may or may not had a profit motive, ultimately the grandfather is killed no matter what. And so, you know, we are asking the question, why wasn't there more police patrols? Why wasn't there, you know, a better, you know, way for the local leaders to uphold law and order? All of those questions I think might be uncomfortable, but they need to, you know, they need to be asked.
Yeah, that's just it, Ying. I really want to kind of highlight that point. Ask the uncomfortable questions. You know, I think it's social media too. Like sometimes I feel, oh, you got to be that happy person and just share all the happy stuff or fun stuff. But, you know, I started sharing some of the sad stuff because I think it's important that people know that life isn't all, you know, peaches and cream and unicorns and rainbows, that we need to, you know, actually talk about what's happening and share. And that sad part, that life is never going to come back, right? I mean, you know, that elderly Asian person was killed, but we need, you know, let's not let that death go to waste. Let's prevent this from happening by sharing information and sharing what's uncomfortable.
Okay, thank you. So, we've got a few more questions, and since they're not from official media sources, I'm going to just read them out loud, and then Mark and Linda, you guys can take them, and you know, and feel free if you. If only one of you wants to take a question, that's fine too. So I'll leave that up to you guys. So Karina Rollins asks, excellent comment, which every American, regardless of race or background, should hear. I have a question about misleading narratives. As a non-Asian American, I feel quite confused and misled by statements put out by some Asian American groups. Stop AAPI hate comes to mind. Could one of you talk about this group's narrative and where it is misleading or wrong? So
Linda, go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, the Stop AAPI hate, it's actually, our official American, we are concerned. And not only me, actually, I'm just, you know, I was doing a temperature check, you know, within our community. I was not alone. We as much as I appreciate, you know, the Stop AAPI hate movement bring lots of attention to the issue. We also feel like it's distracting the main conversations. It focuses too much on the hate without solutions. You report a hate crime. How do you enforce how do you prosecute it? There's no offer to that. And hate crime happened after it's already committed. And where's the action to prevent it? Stop AAPI hate does not do that either. And it focuses too much on the hate, and it's distract from the conversation of the fundamental problem, the fundamental anti-Asian thing. And also I have an issue with the organizations backing or behind the Stop AAPI hate. Chinese for Affirmative Action. This is, and there's another organization behind it. Those are organizations behind last year's, they were supporting the Propo 16, the exactly group who advocate for racial quota, racial preference against Asians. And then they're saying, they're jumping the front and center for the anti-Asian movement, the fighting against anti-Asian movement. I have to ask, where are they really stand? You know, I want to give them benefit of doubt, but I want to see real action. The real action would be really prosecute the crimes, stop the crimes, bring real justice, real fair balance to the Asian community, including changing the position on racial preference. Because if you allow the colleges or even the K-12 educations to treat Asian students differently, consider they're overrepresented in college, in gift program. I think California, you guys no longer have gift programs. I think they are champion for anti-racial, anti-Asian racism. So like we have this conflict in those position. What's their real purpose?
I agree with you, Linda, but I kind of see it more from a sociological perspective. And I'm actually very happy about these hashtags. Because I think for the first time, even though there's, I agree that it's shallow and it can be somewhat misleading.
Mark, I'm very sorry to interrupt. Let me just clarify the question a bit. So the question actually is not about the Stop AAPI Hate hashtag. It's about the reporting center that's been putting out the statistics on hate crimes, and they were formed at the beginning of the pandemic, and they've been telling people in the media and the public in general that there's been a drastic rise in hate crimes against Asian Americans, and they've also, this particular reporting center has also been blaming the Trump administration, particularly former President Trump. COVID rhetoric. And one of the two of the organizations that make up this reporting center, in for instance, Chinese for Affirmative Action, was what Linda was referring to, that these organizations, in fact, were key proponents of racial preferences that hurt Asian Americans in higher education.
So let me just say that a lot of those statistics are very, very misleading. And I just had a conversation with David earlier from WAPO about this. There's a way to manipulate statistics and do a confirmation bias, and there's response biases as well. And I think, you can show that there's an increase, and they wanted to show it for political purpose. But the reality is a lot of this has gone on unreported for so long. Like I said earlier, so many Asians do not report that crimes have happened to them. They don't even go to the police when things happen like this. And also, can we lump in a verbal altercation with a full-on assault? That is what a lot of the aggregate numbers from these statistics are saying, that, suddenly we have thousands of instances when there are varying degrees of severity, and we need to address that nuance and not be shallow about it. That's all.
Okay, thank you. And if I, for those who are in the media, let me point out a couple of things you guys might be interested in. Just because somebody is throwing numbers and statistics and data at you doesn't mean that these numbers, data, and statistics are reliable. I would point out that when the AAPI Hate Reporting Center has reported on incidents of hate against Asian Americans, they would gladly point out the race of the attacker if the attacker or the perpetrator is white. But I've also noticed that they've gone out of their way not to mention the race of the perpetrator if he is not white. And so one that's not just misleading, but it's in many ways dishonest, because I think we all hate racially motivated attacks, and that but those of us who care about these issues, we'd like to know who's actually perpetrating the attacks. And it's very and if this particular group has been out there talking about white supremacy, we'd like to know if the attacks are actually not perpetrated by white supremacists. And number two, this particular reporting center, the Stop AAPI Hate Reporting Center, they've also made it very clear that they believe everybody who criticizes the Chinese government for its role in spreading COVID in the early days of the pandemic. Anybody who criticizes them is committing some form of hate. Now, we may all have different opinions about the Chinese government, but certainly we cannot deny that it has very strong linkages to the beginning of the COVID pandemic. And for politicians who wish to hold China accountable, they're expressing an opinion. They're also expressing their policy preferences. It is not true that everybody who criticizes China somehow automatically is spurring anti-Asian sentiments. And I think we need to be honest about that too. And that's
Amen.
we've seen that the Stop AAPI Hate Reporting Center has not done that. In fact, they've actually promoted quite a bit of misinformation and hyped up quite a bit of quite a bit of very unhealthy debate on this issue, and that's putting it mildly. So we're going to try to wrap up. We've got 2 more questions. We'll try to go through them quickly. One anonymous attendee has asked, from your perspective, why are Asian Americans mostly scared of directly addressing that most of the perpetrators of the violence caught on video are not white? Is there an opportunity for the community to have a dialogue with the Black community? I think we've actually addressed different parts of that question already, but if Mark or Linda, either of you wish to say a few more words, please do.
Yeah, I think I do want to just briefly say that we Asians have fallen into the PC trap. And I think that has been at the expense of our safety and our lives now, because we're more afraid, of offending people and rocking the boat, when sometimes the boat needs to be rocked, and we do need to talk very honestly. And like I said, we should be consistent across the board. If we're going to talk about race in one crime, we should talk about race in another.
I want to add a comment. I noticed, I think starting like last year, maybe it started earlier than what I noticed, but there has been quite a few articles on NBC News talking about Asians hate Black something. I want to make the statement here out and bright. I don't think we have an Asian hate Black problem. I don't hate Black. I have Black friends. They helped us in 2019. We're friends. There's a friend with, you share the same ideas, share philosophies, and there's the people you disagree. But the whole narrative of Asian hate Blacks is wrong. It's not there. Okay, at least not in the world I live. I want it very out and open. No, that's true. And because this narrative, because being pushed down to the Asians, there's afraid. People are afraid that if they say, "Wow, this crime was conducted by this very sensitive word," they are afraid to be called a racist. Yeah, and they're afraid. There's in the Asian community, there's very hierarchy, the structured hierarchy. The politicians are pushing down their views to general community. You have to obey their views. When they say there's you're not allowed to say some like a sensitive word, otherwise you will be classified as the racist group. People are afraid. In terms of the conversation with the dialogue with the Black community, I look at those things as individual cases. I don't think Black community hates Asian community. I don't think Asian community hate Black community. There's crimes unfortunately committed by the people of different races. There's Black, there's white, there's different races. But I don't think you can say a community hate another community and they
And Linda, let me jump in here. According to the public crime data, and I've researched this, there are 5,000 times more instances of Black on Asian crime than Asian on Black crime. So that is a 5,000 to 1 ratio. And, I'm trying to stop all of this division. And in fact, myself and who you heard from earlier, Jennifer O'Connell, her and I are we started a podcast called Red Beans and Fried Rice to bring the Black and Asian communities together, because we have so much in common, So let's talk about the things we have in common versus, the things that divide us.
Yeah, I think, sometimes it was, I blame on the media to inject this hate, between those, community. They want to divide us. I keep saying, let's come together. Don't get them divide us, because really, I think the Black community, the white, the Asian community, once we get to know each other, we're gonna like each other. There's a lot of things we share in common. It not let the politicians or the media try to divide them. I think many of those are due to misunderstanding.
Right.
Once you don't normally attack your friend, right? So once you start to build a bridge, you will say, yeah, our skin color may be different, but there's a things we agree, there are things we disagree, but that's okay. I think in terms of building dialogues, create opportunity for the both community actually to share the experience, to learn to understand each other. Forget about the hate. I really don't think there's a natural hate between the community.
Let's all break bread together. That's the way I see it. Let's all eat together.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the next question, because I know we're running out of time.
Yeah, and thank you for those of you who are staying with us. I think this discussion we just had, I think it gets back to our request for specific action number 2, which is that we would like those who attack Asian Americans held accountable, regardless of their race. It's not okay for a white person in Iowa to be spitting on an Asian person and calling them the COVID virus, or blaming them for the beginning of the COVID virus. But it's also not okay for a Black person to shove an elderly Asian man to the ground and causing him either severe injuries or death. But those are 2 examples. But what we're saying is that regardless of the race of the perpetrator, we are condemning. We're condemning these crimes, these attacks altogether, and that nobody should be committing these incidents of harassment. Nobody should be committing these crimes. Obviously, they are committed, and we'd like the perpetrators, to be held accountable, regardless of race. So let's move on. We have a follow-up question from Caitlin McFall of Fox News. She says, I just want to confirm, are you saying that there has not been an increase in hate crimes directed at the Asian community during COVID? Go ahead, Linda.
Well, I mean, I think there is increase. I don't deny that, because I think it's due to actually it was very interesting. There's a professor at UC Berkeley. Actually, she made a statement just maybe last month or something, talking about when time of crisis, the U.S. as a country tend to blame the Asians. She mentioned about in the 19th century the Chinese Exclusion Act, and then she mentioned about they made a comparison of the recent COVID-19 in the increase in the hate crimes. So I could show you the link to the discussion later. I don't have that off my hand. So yes, I think there's an increase. It's out of out of fear, out of misunderstanding, out of frustration. You've been at home for so long, you want to vent it out. And so yes, I think there's an increase. But also I think, to Mark's point, there's also more people open up, talk about those things. That's also a contribute to the increased report, because I know as a community, we know those things going on. It's just like never get coverage, and all of a sudden they got coverage.
We used to suffer in silence, and now I'm so glad that we are talking about it. So I thank everyone so much for coming and hearing about this today, because you care about our community, and we're going to keep, pounding and sounding the alarm on these things.
Okay, great. Well, we have one last question. It is from Lily Tong Williams, and she asks, is there a national organization to lobby or voice for Asian Americans like Latinos and Blacks, a nonpartisan one not controlled by any party. And Lily is the co-chair of the New Hampshire Asian American Coalition. So that's our last question of the press conference. You know, we want to thank everybody for participating. And in fact, actually, let me do this. If our friends in the media have any more questions, we're happy to stand by and answer them, but we will cut it off for those who are not in the media. Mark and Linda, either of you, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll take this one because you know, I really think a strong movement is one like what we did to defeat Prop 16 in last year. It should be many citizens, local community groups that come together to understand the greater cause, and not one national organization that can play politics with things. That's why this is a nonpartisan coalition that's really focused on the heart of the issue. It's more about working together with other groups and doing what you can to make an impact and to spread the word in your local level or your community level. Because sometimes it's not just your city, it can be as far ranging as your county or one ethnic group. There are so many ways that we all come together as natural constituencies, but we all need to work together with everyone. Like you said, like Lily said, to her point, Hispanic, Black groups, white groups, everyone. So these are very, very important. It's very important to work together in the community and be one salad of sorts of different elements to come together to work on a common issue. That's the way I see it being successful.
Linda, do you have anything to add?
Sure. I think for the Asian community, in my opinion, we lack of an organization that actually advocated for the interests of the Asian Americans. Quite often they've been dictated by the party's interest. I think this POP is a moment. All the concerned groups come together and really ask for what will be the interest of the Asian American. Asian American is very diverse. It's, you have the people from the larger countries, the Chinese, Korean, Japanese, but you also have the much smaller, countries. They have different needs. They come here from different backgrounds, but I think we all share some common values. And I haven't seen a nonpartisan, truly nonpartisan, even though they claim to be nonpartisan, but truly actually advocate for the Asians, true interest. But I think this could be a moment, because I see a lot of weakening of the Asian communities actually say, what is, are those policies good for us? Are those us good for us? I hope that answers your question.
Okay, well, thank you both. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. A big thank you to our friends in the media, and certainly a big thank you just to members of the organizations that have signed on to our coalition, as well as to ordinary Americans who are interested in this topic and hope to make a difference and hope to push forward for some progress on this issue. Please do stay in touch. You guys have our press release, and in the chat section, Linda and Mark have both provided their website addresses as well. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We do hope that concrete action will be taken on this issue, or on the set of issues we've discussed today, and we look forward to staying in touch with all of you. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.